We are back with MIRIAM Neff, founder of the nonprofit ministry Widow Connection, talking about how to find new purpose in life after losing a spouse. And now you, like so many widows, had to relearn doing a lot of things yourself. Where you used to have someone else help you, you had to do it all by yourself. You took 8 trips that first year after you lost your husband, Bob, many places that he'd been in his ministry. Tell me about that season.
I was kind of trying to connect with him and find more of his spirit, as if 41 years wasn't enough. But one of those trips took me to Burkina Faso, Africa, and his radio friend there said, "You're a widow now, so I want to get some widows together and you teach them the Bible." Well, okay. Asked me to open the Bible and teach, there I am. So I packed in, it was an open air church, and for those who've traveled to developing countries, they know what that is. 200 young widows, some with nursing babies, thin, packed in there. And I said, "You know, I don't understand your life," through an interpreter, of course, "but you and I have buried our husbands." And their eyes changed, and they looked at me. And then I began to teach them some Old Testament stories that are really countercultural: the widow and her pot of oil, God's love for them. And I began in that trip in one way to say, okay, honey, you set me up for this. You're why I'm here. And I began to see widows in other poor places with different eyes. I was already seeing at home from my travels, widows suffer. Widows in the United States, many of them become more poor because their income is less and their living style needs to change dramatically, and they might not know how to do it. I knew how to balance our family budget, but I didn't know investments, and today I love investments. Anyone can learn, but it's a lot to take on, it's a lot to do, and when you're grieving, I would say my travels helped me find courage that Miriam was going to be okay, and I didn't know that at first.
Well, you had this idea, you saw the lack of support that women, particularly in the developing world, do not have as a widow. And then, of course, you saw yourself the lack of support in some ways for widows. So you had this idea, and tell me about this idea and how you launched it.
Well, when I was in that room in the Splendide in Ouagadougou, which wasn't very splendid, and I knew that that's when God was saying, "Miriam, you need to do this." I came home, and my daughter, who's my best friend and very wise, says, "Start something on your own. Don't go to a big organization to come alongside them." So we started Widow Connection, like a small business, but then got our 501c3 counseling background. So I put on our website things about depression, things about budgeting, print out free budget form, the things I needed to know about the change in my family, in my friendship network. We lose 75% of our friends, so do divorced people. So how do you deal with that loss? So we started with simple, cheap website, and then books that we wrote from one widow to another, and other books, and I dug more deeply into the widows of Scripture, came to love them intensely. And out of that have written a book about widows in a fictionalized historical sense. But every time we would learn a need widows have, we would try to create a resource for that. And it's given me not only opportunity, but purpose. And for instance, the training we do now of these poor widows in Africa, based on a little skill. Grandma Hattie taught me how to sew on a treadle machine when I was 8 years old. When I was running around Northwestern University getting my degrees, I wasn't bragging. I can treadle on a machine. That's not cool, you know. But God takes these threads and weaves them together in your new life. And I hope that people listening to us today never think anything in their life is wasted. It isn't. You may not see how God is going to use that in the change that's happened in your life, but God knows all about it.
So for people watching right now who have been widowed just briefly or just about out of time, but what would you say to them about finding purpose and what that next season is that no one ever signs up for?
Well, first of all, I'd say Philippians 1:6, remember, God says that He starts a good work in us and He's going to complete it. He doesn't end it with our loss. And I learned that He had invested in me through every negative and positive thing, something that He wanted to spend. I call it my kingdom equity. So He's built into me this great equity. And He's like, okay, how are you going to spend it? Now you're going to spend it, you know how to sew on a treadle. Now you know that how to invest in stocks. And now someone else might say, well, I don't want to go to Africa. You don't need to. Fast and pray. But God has a purpose that isn't dependent on that crisis or that tragedy in your life.
So good. There's so much more. We're going to have you back that we want to talk to you about. But thanks for sharing, because I know we compressed it and we made it sound so easy, but having the courage to start a whole new season of your life, I know wasn't. So thank you for all the encouragement that you've brought to widows and that you will bring.
The tragedy doesn't define you, it just equips you.
So good. I hope that you are hearing that whatever tragedy you've been through, maybe it's not widowhood, maybe it's something else, it does not define you. And God has a whole new story He wants to write in your life. If you just want someone to pray with you, maybe you're being challenged today to say, you know what, I have been in grief, I have felt kind of lost in my life, I don't really know where to turn. We want to just bring you some encouragement today, because God has more for you. And He's going to use all of your pain to make beauty in this world. It's the miracle that He does. I don't even know how He does it sometimes. And when we're in those dark moments, we can't see it. But I can tell you right now, I've interviewed thousands of people. It can happen if you open up your heart. Why don't you give our prayer lines a call right now? That number is 1-866-273-4444.